What if everything around us, every chair, every tree, every concept of love and justice, is nothing but a shadow of a perfect reality we can never truly see? This is the mind-bending world of Plato, the philosopher who dared to say that reality itself is an illusion. Today, we're diving into the revolutionary ideas that shaped 2,400 years of Western thought. Plato, the father of Western philosophy, a student of Socrates, and the teacher of Aristotle. But beyond the famous academy and his legendary dialogues, Plato's philosophy challenges our most basic assumptions about existence, knowledge, and society. Today we're exploring his core principles, from the theory of forms to his vision of the ideal state, and the pursuit of absolute truth through reason. What we discover might just change how we see the world. Born around 428 BCE into an aristocratic Athenian family, Plato witnessed the glory and the collapse of his beloved Athens. The Peloponnesian War had devastated the city-state, and democracy, once the pride of Athens, had degenerated into mob rule. When his mentor Socrates was executed by democratic vote in 399 BCE, Plato's disillusionment was complete. This wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was the catalyst for his life's work. Plato saw a society in crisis, where truth was relative and justice meant nothing more than the interest of the stronger. He rejected this moral chaos and embarked on a philosophical quest to discover absolute, unchanging truths. In 387 BCE, he founded the Academy in Athens, the first institution of higher learning in the Western world, where he taught for 4 decades. His dialogues, written as conversations between Socrates and various interlocutors, weren't just philosophy, they were a blueprint for saving civilization itself. Principle 1. The theory of forms. At the heart of Plato's philosophy is the theory of forms, one of the most radical and influential ideas in intellectual history. This theory isn't just an interesting philosophical curiosity, it's a complete reimagining of what reality actually is. Plato argued that the physical world we experience through our senses is not the real world at all. Instead, it's merely a shadow, an imperfect copy of true reality. The true reality exists in what Plato called the realm of forms, a spiritual, eternal dimension where perfect, unchanging concepts reside. To understand just how revolutionary this idea was, we need to grasp what Plato meant by forms. The forms are abstract, perfect, unchanging concepts or ideals that transcend time and space. They're not physical objects we can touch or see, they exist in a realm beyond our physical world. But here's the crucial point, even though the forms are abstract, that doesn't mean they're not real. In fact, according to Plato, the forms are more real than any individual physical object we encounter in daily life. So concepts like beauty, justice, goodness, redness, roundness, or even mathematical concepts like circularity are all forms. Because they represent the ultimate reality, they're often capitalized to distinguish them from their physical manifestations. Think about it this way, every beautiful object anyone has ever seen, a sunset painting the sky in brilliant colors, a masterpiece hanging in a museum, a face that takes your breath away, is just an imperfect manifestation of the form of beauty itself. That sunset will fade, that painting will crack and decay, that face will age and wrinkle. But the form of beauty? It's eternal, perfect, and unchanging. It exists independent of any physical beautiful thing, and it will continue to exist even if every beautiful object in the universe disappeared tomorrow. The same applies to moral concepts. Every just action ever performed, a parent protecting their child, a judge delivering a fair verdict, a citizen standing up against oppression, these are all imperfect reflections of the form of justice. The form of justice itself is perfect, eternal, and unchanging. Physical just actions come and go, they're influenced by circumstances and cultural contexts, they can be performed imperfectly. But justice as a form is absolute and transcendent. Let's make this concrete with an example Plato might have used. Imagine drawing a square on a piece of paper. Now imagine someone else also draws a square on their paper. Your drawings are likely imperfect. Maybe the lines aren't perfectly straight. Perhaps the angles aren't exactly 90 degrees. The sides might not be precisely equal in length. Additionally, your square and the other person's square will inevitably differ in size, color, thickness of lines, and countless other details. In Plato's terminology, these physical drawings reside in the physical realm. They're imperfect, changing, and temporary. Eventually, the paper will decay and the drawings will cease to exist. But here's the profound question Plato asked. Despite all these imperfections and differences, what is it that makes both drawings recognizable as squares? What unites them? The answer is the form of square. Both individuals share a similar concept or ideal of what square means, even though their physical representations turned out differently. This concept of square, perfect, with exactly 4 equal sides and 4 90-degree angles, exists in the realm of forms. It's unchanging, abstract, and eternal. And according to Plato, this form of square is more real than either of the physical drawings. The physical squares participate in or imitate the form, but they're not the form itself. Here's another powerful example that demonstrates the theory. Look around and identify green objects in your environment, perhaps a green plant, a green book cover, a green piece of clothing. Now ask yourself, have you ever seen green itself? Not a green marker or a green blob or a green anything, just pure green, green in and of itself. The answer is no. Green as a pure concept doesn't exist as its own separate entity in our physical world. Yet we all know what green is. We can identify it, categorize it, and distinguish it from other colors. According to Plato, this is because green exists as an unchanging ideal form in the realm of forms, while the green plant, green book, and green clothing are individual physical objects that participate in the form of green. They're green because they partake in greenness, but none of them is greenness itself. This brings us to the crucial distinction at the heart of Plato's metaphysics, the two-realm structure of reality. On one side, we have the physical realm, the material world we see, touch, hear, smell, and taste. This is the world of becoming, of constant change and imperfection. Physical objects are born, they change, they decay, and they die. A tree grows from a seed, flourishes for decades or centuries, then eventually falls and rots. A human being is born, ages, and dies. Even mountains erode over geological time. Nothing in the physical realm is permanent or perfect. On the other side, we have the spiritual realm, the realm of forms. This is the world of being, of permanence and perfection. The forms are aspatial, meaning they have no spatial dimensions and exist outside of space. They're atemporal, meaning they exist outside of time, not eternal in the sense of lasting forever through time, but transcendent to time altogether. A form doesn't begin, persist, or end. It simply is. The forms are unchanging, perfect, and represent the true essence of things. While physical objects are qualified and conditioned, a red apple, a round ball, a beautiful sunset, the forms are unqualified perfection, redness itself, roundness itself, beauty itself. Plato illustrated these levels of reality and knowledge through his famous analogy of the divided line. He divided reality into 4 levels, arranged hierarchically from least real to most real. At the bottom are images and shadows, mere reflections of physical objects, like shadows on a wall or reflections in water. This represents the lowest level of cognition, called ikasia or imagination. One step above that are physical objects themselves, the trees, animals, and manufactured objects we interact with daily. Knowledge of these objects is called pistis, or belief. Then we ascend into the intelligible realm. First comes mathematical reasoning and abstract concepts, called dianoia or thought. This involves using hypotheses and deductive reasoning to understand mathematical principles and relationships. Finally, at the highest level, we reach the forms themselves, comprehended through noesis or pure intelligence. This highest form of knowledge involves direct intellectual apprehension of the forms through dialectic and reason, without relying on hypotheses or sensory perception. At this pinnacle sits the form of the good, which illuminates all other forms just as the sun illuminates physical objects. The relationship between the forms and physical objects is one of participation or imitation. Physical objects exist and have the qualities they have because they participate in the forms. A beautiful painting is beautiful because it participates in the form of beauty. A just action is just because it participates in the form of justice. A red apple is red because it participates in the form of redness. Without the forms, physical objects wouldn't have any qualities at all. They wouldn't even be recognizable as distinct things. The forms provide the essential structures that make the physical world intelligible and coherent. This leads to a startling implication. The physical world is dependent on the forms, not the other way around. The forms exist independently, whether or not any physical objects exist to imitate them. But physical objects derive their entire existence from participating in the forms. This is why Plato insisted the forms are more real than physical objects. They're the source, the original, the model, while physical objects are derivative, copies, shadows cast by the light of the forms. This two-realm structure, the physical realm of appearances and the spiritual realm of forms, became the absolute foundation of Western metaphysics. It influenced virtually every subsequent philosophical and religious tradition in the West. Christianity's distinction between the material world and the spiritual kingdom of heaven, Kant's distinction between phenomena and noumena, even modern Platonism in mathematics, all trace their lineage back to Plato's theory of forms. But Plato's theory also raises profound questions about knowledge. If the physical world we perceive through our senses is just an imperfect copy, how can we gain true knowledge? Plato's answer was radical. True knowledge comes not from sensory experience but from reason and intellectual contemplation. Our souls, he believed, encounter the forms before birth, and learning is actually a process of remembering, recollecting those eternal truths our souls once knew directly. The philosopher's task is to ascend from the shadows of physical reality to the brilliant light of the forms, to see reality as it truly is. The theory of forms represents Plato's uncompromising commitment to the existence of absolute, objective truth. In a world of constant change and disagreement, where everything seems relative and opinions conflict, Plato insisted there must be unchanging standards by which we can judge what is truly beautiful, truly just, truly good. These standards are the forms, and they exist whether we acknowledge them or not, whether we can perceive them or not. Philosophy, for Plato, is the discipline of training the mind to transcend the illusions of the physical world and grasp these eternal realities. Principle 2. Knowledge through reason. For Plato, true knowledge wasn't something gained through the senses. It was attained through reason and intellectual contemplation. This wasn't merely a matter of philosophical preference. It was a fundamental claim about the very nature of knowledge itself. Plato believed that knowledge must possess two essential characteristics. It must be certain and infallible, and its object must be genuinely real, not mere appearance. These requirements led him to a radical conclusion that separated him from most people's everyday understanding of how we come to know things. Since the physical world is constantly changing, flowing, and impermanent, it cannot provide true knowledge, only opinions, beliefs, and appearances. Real knowledge, genuine episteme, comes from grasping the eternal forms through philosophical reasoning and dialectical inquiry. To understand Plato's epistemology, his theory of knowledge, we need to grasp the fundamental distinction he drew between two entirely different cognitive states. On one side, there's doxa, typically translated as opinion or belief. This is the mental state we occupy when we interact with the physical, sensible world through our senses. When we see a beautiful sunset, taste a delicious meal, or hear a moving piece of music, we're forming opinions about sensible particulars. These opinions might be true or false, but they lack the certainty and stability required for genuine knowledge. They're influenced by our subjective perceptions, our bodily conditions, our cultural backgrounds, and countless other variable factors. On the other side stands episteme, true knowledge, genuine understanding, wisdom. This is the mental state we achieve when we comprehend the eternal forms through pure intellect and reason. Episteme is certain, infallible, and unchanging because its objects, the forms, are themselves certain, real, and unchanging. When a philosopher grasps the form of justice itself, not just particular just actions, they possess knowledge in the true sense. This knowledge cannot be shaken by changing circumstances, differing perspectives, or sensory illusions because it's grounded in eternal reality itself. Plato's insistence on this distinction wasn't arbitrary. He was responding to the intellectual crisis of his time, particularly the relativism promoted by the sophists and philosophers like Protagoras. Protagoras had famously declared that man is the measure of all things, meaning that truth is relative to each individual's perceptions and beliefs. If something appears cold to one person and warm to another, both are equally right because there's no objective standard beyond individual perception. Plato found this position intellectually and morally devastating. If all beliefs are equally valid, then there's no truth to pursue, no wisdom to attain, no basis for ethical judgment. Society would collapse into chaos where might makes right and persuasive rhetoric trumps genuine understanding. To combat this relativism, Plato needed to establish that genuine, objective knowledge exists and explain how we can attain it. His solution was to argue that true knowledge must be of what is real and unchanging, the forms. Sense perception, no matter how vivid or consistent, cannot yield genuine knowledge because its objects are always in flux, always becoming rather than being. The beautiful sunset fades, the delicious meal is digested, the moving music ends. These experiences are real in a sense, but they're not the kind of stable, permanent reality that can ground infallible knowledge. They're shadows, reflections, appearances, not the things themselves. This brings us to one of Plato's most fascinating and controversial doctrines, the theory of recollection, or anamnesis. If true knowledge is of the eternal forms, and if our souls are imprisoned in bodies that only perceive the changing physical world, how do we ever come to know the forms? Plato's answer was startling. We don't learn the forms for the first time, we remember them. Our immortal souls encountered the forms directly before we were born into physical bodies. Learning, therefore, is actually a process of recollection, of recovering knowledge our souls once possessed but forgot upon incarnation. Plato illustrated this theory most famously in the dialogue Meno, where Socrates demonstrates that an uneducated slave boy can be led through questioning to discover geometric truths he was never taught. Socrates doesn't tell the boy the answer. Instead, through carefully structured questions, he helps the boy remember mathematical principles. The boy couldn't have learned these principles from sensory experience. You can't see perfect geometric forms in nature, only imperfect approximations. Therefore, Plato concluded, the boy must have known these truths before birth, and Socrates merely helped him recollect them. The theory appears again in the Phaedo, where Plato offers a more developed argument. He points out that when we see two approximately equal sticks, we immediately recognize that they fall short of perfect equality. But how can we judge them as imperfect copies of equality unless we already possess a concept of perfect equality itself? We've never encountered perfect equality in sensory experience. All physical equals are approximate, context-dependent, and imperfect. Yet we possess the concept and use it constantly as a standard of judgment. Plato's explanation, our souls knew the form of equality before birth, and seeing imperfect equal things triggers our recollection of the perfect form. This theory has profound implications for education and philosophy. If learning is recollection, then the teacher's role isn't to pour information into empty minds, it's to midwife the birth of knowledge already latent within the soul. This is why Socrates called himself a midwife, who helped others give birth to ideas. The philosopher's task is to turn the soul away from the shadows of sensory appearance toward the light of intelligible reality, to awaken the dormant knowledge within. Education becomes a matter of reorientation, of helping the soul remember what it once knew and guiding it back toward contemplation of the forms. But recollection alone isn't enough. Plato recognized that most people remain trapped in the world of appearances, mistaking opinion for knowledge, never suspecting there's a higher reality to be grasped. Only through rigorous philosophical training, a systematic education in mathematics, dialectic, and contemplation, can the soul ascend from opinion to true knowledge. This educational journey is long, difficult, and demanding. It requires not just intellectual ability but moral virtue, self-discipline, and an unwavering commitment to truth. Plato outlined this educational program most fully in the Republic. Future philosopher rulers begin their education in childhood with music and gymnastics, not for entertainment or physical fitness primarily, but to harmonize the soul and cultivate the proper balance between reason and spirit. As they mature, they study mathematics extensively, arithmetic, geometry, solid geometry, astronomy, and harmonics. Why mathematics? Because mathematical objects occupy an intermediate position between sensible particulars and forms. They're more abstract and stable than physical objects, but more concrete and graspable than pure forms. Mathematics trains the mind to think abstractly, to reason without relying on sensory perception, and to recognize unchanging truths. After years of mathematical training, the most promising students advance to the highest study, dialectic. Dialectic is the philosophical method of rigorous questioning and logical analysis that Socrates practiced. Through dialectic, philosophers examine their assumptions, test their beliefs, clarify concepts, and gradually ascend toward direct intellectual apprehension of the forms themselves. This process isn't quick or easy. Plato estimated it takes until age 50 before a philosopher ruler is ready to govern. But only through this extensive training can one develop the intellectual and moral capacity to grasp eternal truths and apply them to practical governance. This leads directly to one of Plato's most famous and controversial claims: philosophers should be kings, and kings should be philosophers. Only those who possess genuine knowledge, episteme of the forms, are qualified to rule. Why? Because only they can see beyond the conflicting opinions, competing interests, and short-term considerations that dominate ordinary political life. A philosopher ruler who comprehends the form of justice itself, who understands the form of the good, can make decisions based on eternal, objective truths rather than temporary expedience or personal advantage. Most people, according to Plato, never progress beyond opinion. They're like prisoners in the famous allegory of the cave, chained since childhood to face a wall where they see only shadows cast by a fire behind them. They mistake these shadows for reality itself, never suspecting that they're seeing mere projections of artifacts, which are themselves only copies of the true forms outside the cave. If a prisoner is freed and dragged outside into the sunlight, they're initially blinded and pained. They want to return to the comfortable darkness where shadows are familiar. Only gradually, through a difficult process of adjustment, can they come to see the real world illuminated by the sun, which represents the form of the good. The philosopher who has made this ascent from the cave of ignorance into the light of knowledge possesses a fundamentally different relationship to reality than ordinary people. They've transcended doxa and achieved episteme. They've trained their intellect to contemplate abstract eternal truths rather than being captivated by concrete, changing appearances. They've purified their souls through the study of mathematics and philosophy, aligning themselves with the rational order of reality itself. This transformation isn't just intellectual, it's moral and spiritual. The philosopher becomes wise, just, moderate, and courageous through this process of education and contemplation. Plato drew these distinctions starkly because he believed the stakes were existentially high. A society governed by opinion rather than knowledge would inevitably descend into injustice and chaos. Politicians who pander to popular beliefs, who use rhetoric to manipulate rather than reason to persuade, who pursue power and wealth rather than truth and virtue, these are the natural products of a system that doesn't distinguish between knowledge and opinion. Only by recognizing that genuine knowledge exists, that it requires rigorous training to attain, and that only those who possess it should govern can society achieve true justice and flourishing. This is why Plato insisted on the absolute priority of reason over sensation, of intellect over perception, of philosophy over experience. Not because sensory experience is useless, it can trigger recollection and provide practical information for daily life. But because sensory experience alone can never yield the certain, infallible, unchanging knowledge required for ethics, politics, and the good life. True knowledge comes from turning inward, from cultivating the intellect's capacity to grasp abstract forms through reason, and from the long, difficult journey of philosophical education that transforms the entire soul. In Plato's vision, the philosopher stands apart from the masses not through arrogance but through understanding. While others mistake shadows for reality and opinions for truth, the philosopher has glimpsed eternal forms and can never be satisfied with mere appearances again. This creates a profound responsibility. The philosopher must return to the cave, must descend back into the world of politics and human affairs, not for personal gain but to guide others toward truth and justice. The philosopher king rules not because they desire power, but because they alone possess the knowledge necessary to rule well. This is the culmination of Plato's epistemology. Knowledge isn't just an intellectual achievement but a moral and political imperative. Principle 3. The form of the good. At the apex of Plato's hierarchy of forms sits the form of the good, the ultimate source of reality, truth, and knowledge. This isn't just one form among many others. It's the supreme principle that stands above all other forms, giving them their very existence and intelligibility. The form of the good occupies a position so exalted in Plato's philosophy that he struggled to describe it directly, relying instead on powerful metaphors and analogies. It is the highest principle, the source of all that is right, beautiful, and true, and understanding it represents the pinnacle of human intellectual and spiritual achievement. To grasp what Plato meant by the form of the good, we need to understand his famous analogy of the sun, presented in Book 6 of the Republic. Plato draws a parallel between two realms, the visible realm of physical objects that we perceive with our senses, and the intelligible realm of forms that we comprehend with our intellect. In the visible realm, we have objects that possess color and form, and we have eyes capable of sight. But these two things alone aren't sufficient for vision. We need a third element, light. And the source of light is the sun. Without the sun's illumination, even though objects exist and eyes have the power of sight, we would see nothing. We would fumble in darkness, unable to perceive the world around us. The sun does more than just make things visible, though. It's also the cause of growth, nourishment, and generation. Every living thing on Earth depends on the sun for its existence. Plants convert sunlight into energy through photosynthesis. Animals depend on plants or on other animals that eat plants. The entire food chain, the whole cycle of life, traces back to the sun as its ultimate source. Without the sun, life on Earth would cease to exist. In Plato's view, the The sun is thus the author of the visible realm in a profound sense. It both illuminates what exists and causes things to exist in the first place. Now, Plato asks us to understand that the form of the good plays exactly the same role in the intelligible realm that the sun plays in the visible realm. Just as the sun illuminates physical objects and makes them visible to the eye, the form of the good illuminates the other forms and makes them intelligible to the mind. Just as we need light from the sun to see, we need the light of the good to truly understand. Without the form of the good, the intellect would be like eyes in darkness. It might have the capacity to know, but it would have no third thing to render the forms comprehensible. The good is what gives truth to the things known and the power to know to the knower. But the parallel goes even deeper. Just as the sun is the cause not only of visibility but of existence itself in the visible realm, the form of the good is the source not only of the intelligibility of the forms but of their very being. This is one of Plato's most mystical and difficult claims. He writes that the good provides the forms with their existence and essence, yet the good itself is beyond being superior to it in rank and power. What does this enigmatic statement mean? Plato seems to be saying that the good transcends even existence itself. It's not merely the highest existing thing, but something more fundamental than existence, the very principle that makes existence possible. This places the form of the good in a unique and paradoxical position. All other forms are what they are. Justice is justice, beauty is beauty, circularity is circularity. But the good seems to be the source from which all these forms derive their being and their essential nature. It's as if the good is the fountain from which reality itself flows. Without the good, there would be no forms at all, and without the forms, there would be no physical objects participating in them. The entire structure of reality, from the highest forms down to the lowest material shadows, depends ultimately on the form of the good. Plato also emphasizes that sight is the most sun-like of all the senses. There's a special affinity or kinship between the eye and the sun, a natural compatibility that makes vision possible. Similarly, the human intellect has a special affinity with the form of the good. The rational part of the soul, when properly cultivated through education and philosophy, is naturally oriented toward the good. Just as the eye is made for light, the intellect is made for truth, and truth ultimately derives from the good. This is why philosophy, the love of wisdom, the pursuit of truth, is humanity's highest calling. We're fulfilling our deepest nature when we turn our intellect toward contemplation of the forms, and ultimately toward the good itself. Understanding the form of the good isn't merely an abstract intellectual exercise. It has profound practical implications for ethics and politics. Plato argued that understanding the good is absolutely essential for making just decisions and governing wisely. Why? Because only someone who comprehends the ultimate source of truth, value, and reality can distinguish between genuine goods and mere appearances of good, between true justice and the semblance of justice, between wisdom and clever sophistry. This is why Plato insisted that philosopher kings, rulers who have ascended to the vision of the good, are the only legitimate governors. Think about the implications for political life. Most politicians operate within the realm of opinion and appearance. They respond to public sentiment. They balance competing interests. They pursue what seems advantageous in the short term. But someone who has contemplated the form of the good possesses an entirely different perspective. They can see beyond the shifting opinions and temporary circumstances to the eternal principles that should govern human life. They understand not just what people want, but what is genuinely good for them. They can distinguish between policies that pander to base desires and policies that promote true flourishing. This is why Plato believed philosophers must be compelled to return to the cave and rule, despite their preference for pure contemplation. The good, in Plato's system, isn't just a moral concept in the way we typically understand morality today. It's not simply about being kind or following rules or promoting happiness. Rather, the good is the metaphysical foundation of existence itself. It's what makes reality rational, ordered, and intelligible. It's the reason there are universal principles rather than chaos. It's why truth exists as something objective rather than merely subjective opinion. The good is both a supreme metaphysical principle, the source of all being, and a supreme ethical principle, the standard by which all actions and lives should be judged. This unification of metaphysics and ethics is one of Plato's most distinctive contributions. In his philosophy, the way things are and the way things ought to be converge in the form of the good. To understand reality correctly is simultaneously to understand value correctly. To know the truth is to know the good. This is why philosophy isn't just one academic discipline among others. It's the master discipline that integrates all knowledge into a unified understanding grounded in the good. The physicist studying nature, the mathematician exploring abstract relations, the ethicist pondering right action, the politician crafting laws, all are ultimately pursuing aspects of the same supreme reality, the form of the good. Plato's concept of the form of the good profoundly influenced later religious and philosophical traditions, particularly Christianity. Early Christian theologians, especially those influenced by Neoplatonism, saw clear parallels between Plato's form of the good and the Christian concept of God. Just as the good is the supreme principle beyond being, the source of all existence and truth, so God is the eternal creator who transcends creation while sustaining it in existence. Just as the good illuminates the forms and makes them intelligible, so God is described as the light of the world, who illuminates truth and reality. Just as contemplation of the good represents humanity's highest calling in Plato's philosophy, so union with God represents the ultimate purpose of human existence in Christian theology. The influence runs even deeper. Augustine, one of the most important early Christian philosophers, explicitly adopted Platonic ideas about truth, knowledge, and goodness, arguing that God contains within himself the eternal ideas or forms according to which he created the world. Thomas Aquinas, though more influenced by Aristotle than Plato, still maintained that God is identical with the good itself, and that all created goods participate in and derive from the divine goodness. Medieval Christian metaphysics, with its hierarchical vision of reality descending from God through angels to humans to animals to inanimate matter, echoes Plato's hierarchy of forms descending from the good. Even the mystical dimension of Christianity, the idea that the highest religious experience involves direct contemplation of God beyond all images, concepts, and sensory experiences, mirrors Plato's vision of the philosopher ascending beyond the material world to direct intellectual apprehension of the form of the good. Both traditions emphasize that this ultimate vision requires purification, discipline, and transcendence of ordinary consciousness. Both see it as ineffable, impossible to fully capture in words or concepts because it transcends ordinary categories of thought. And both regard this vision as simultaneously the highest knowledge and the greatest good, the state in which human nature finds its ultimate fulfillment. However, there are also important differences. The Christian God is personal, capable of love, will, and relationship with creatures, while Plato's form of the good is an abstract principle. Christianity emphasizes grace, faith, and divine revelation, while Plato's philosophy emphasizes human reason, education, and intellectual assent. The Christian vision includes redemption, incarnation, and salvation history, none of which have parallels in Plato's thought. Nevertheless, the influence is undeniable. Christian theology borrowed Platonic metaphysics and adapted it to monotheistic faith, creating a synthesis that dominated Western thought for over 1,000 years. It's also worth noting that Plato himself seemed to recognize the difficulty of comprehending the form of the good directly. Throughout the Republic, Socrates repeatedly insists that he cannot provide a direct account of the good itself, only analogies and approximations. He offers the sun analogy, the divided line, and the allegory of the cave as ways of gesturing towards something that transcends ordinary discourse. This suggests that Plato saw the good as something ultimately mystical, apprehensible through philosophical dialectic and contemplation, but not fully expressible in words. The philosopher who has glimpsed the good has undergone a kind of intellectual and spiritual transformation that cannot be adequately communicated to those who haven't shared the experience. This mystical dimension distinguishes Plato from many later Western philosophers who tried to make philosophy entirely rational and systematic. For Plato, philosophy culminates in something like religious vision, an encounter with ultimate reality that transforms the soul. The form of the good represents not just the highest truth to be known but the highest experience to be lived, the state in which the philosopher's soul aligns itself with the deepest structure of reality. Knowledge of the good is simultaneously ethical transformation, because to truly see the good is to love it, and to love it is to be shaped by it. In contemporary philosophy, Plato's form of the good remains influential, though often in secularized versions. The idea that there are objective moral truths independent of human opinion, that reason can discover principles of right and wrong, that some lives are genuinely better than others not merely by subjective preference but by objective standard, all these ideas trace their ancestry to Plato's good. Even philosophers who reject the metaphysical apparatus of forms often retain something like Plato's conviction that goodness is real, knowable, and authoritative. The form of the good, whether conceived religiously, metaphysically, or naturalistically, continues to represent humanity's deepest intuition that truth, beauty, and goodness are not arbitrary human constructions but dimensions of reality itself. Principle 4. The tripartite soul. Plato's philosophy wasn't just about abstract metaphysics, it was deeply concerned with the human soul and ethics. While many thinkers focused solely on theoretical questions about reality and knowledge, Plato understood that philosophy must also address the practical question of how we should live. His answer required understanding human nature itself, which led him to develop one of the most influential psychological theories in Western history, the doctrine of the tripartite soul. This theory proposes that the human soul, or psyche, consists of three distinct parts, each with its own desires, motivations, and functions. These three parts are the rational part, logistikon, the spirited part, thymoeides, and the appetitive part, epithemetiken. Understanding how these parts interact, conflict, and can be harmonized became the foundation not only for Plato's ethics but also for his entire political philosophy. The rational part of the soul, the logistikon, is located in the head and represents our capacity for thought, reasoning, and wisdom. This is the part of us that loves learning, seeks truth, and contemplates the forms. When we engage in philosophy, mathematics, or any form of serious intellectual inquiry, we're exercising the rational part of our soul. It's the aspect of human nature that can grasp abstract concepts, make logical inferences, and understand eternal principles. The rational part desires knowledge and wisdom above all else. It finds fulfillment not in physical pleasures or worldly success, but in comprehending reality as it truly is. This part of the soul is naturally suited to rule over the others, just as reason should govern our lives. The spirited part of the soul, the thymoeides, is located near the chest region and encompasses what we might call our emotional or passionate nature, but not all emotions. Specifically, it deals with emotions related to honor, recognition, courage, righteous anger, and pride. This is the part of us that responds when we feel insulted or disrespected, that drives us to defend our values, that motivates us to pursue excellence and win victory. When an athlete competes fiercely, when a soldier fights courageously in battle, when we feel indignation at injustice, we're experiencing the spirited part of the soul in action. It desires honor, glory, and recognition. Importantly, the spirited part is naturally allied with reason. When properly educated, it supports the rational part in controlling the appetites rather than rebelling against reason's authority. The appetitive part of the soul, the epithemetiken, is located in the stomach region and represents our basic physical desires and material wants. This is the part that hungers for food, thirsts for drink, craves sexual gratification, and desires wealth and material possessions. The appetitive part is concerned entirely with bodily pleasures and immediate satisfactions. It has no long-term plans, no understanding of limits or moderation, no concern for consequences. It simply wants, endlessly, insatiably, without rational direction. While the appetitive part is necessary for survival and isn't evil in itself, it makes a terrible master. When appetite rules the soul, the individual becomes enslaved to physical cravings and material pursuits, never achieving genuine happiness or virtue. What makes Plato's theory so psychologically astute is his recognition that these three parts can come into conflict with each other. We've all experienced this inner struggle. You know you should study for an important exam, reason, but you're craving another episode of your favorite show, appetite. You want to lose weight, reason, but you're drawn to the dessert menu, appetite. You feel insulted by someone's comment, spirit, and want to lash out, but you recognize that responding angrily would be unwise, reason. These internal conflicts aren't merely arbitrary. They represent genuine divisions within the soul, different motivational systems pulling us in different directions. Plato illustrates the tripartite soul most vividly through his famous chariot allegory in the dialogue Phaedrus. He asks us to imagine the soul as a chariot pulled by two winged horses and guided by a charioteer. The charioteer represents the rational part, reason attempting to steer the soul toward truth and enlightenment. The two horses represent the spirited and appetitive parts, but they're radically different in nature. The noble horse, representing the spirited part, is described as upright, cleanly made, with a white coat and dark eyes. This horse is a lover of honor, modesty, and temperance. It's well-behaved and responds to mere words and gentle guidance from the charioteer. It needs no whip or harsh treatment. It naturally cooperates with reason's direction. When the charioteer calls upon it, this noble horse helps control the other horse and propels the chariot toward its proper destination, the ridge of heaven where the forms can be beheld. The ignoble horse, representing the appetitive part, is completely opposite. Plato describes it as crooked, lumbering, put together poorly, with a dark color, gray eyes, and blood-red complexion. This horse is the mate of insolence and pride, shag-eared and deaf, barely yielding even to whip and spur. It constantly pulls the chariot downward toward earthly pleasures, threatening to drag the entire vehicle off course. The charioteer must struggle continuously to restrain this unruly horse, preventing it from overpowering the noble horse and crashing the chariot. The destination of the chariot is crucial to understanding Plato's vision. The charioteer aims to reach the ridge of heaven, beyond which lie the forms: beauty, wisdom, courage, justice, goodness, and ultimately truth itself. These eternal essences nourish the horse's wings, keeping the chariot airborne. But if the ignoble horse overcomes the charioteer's control, if appetite dominates reason, the wings lose their nourishment and the chariot falls to earth. The soul loses its ability to contemplate the forms and becomes trapped in the material world, enslaved to bodily desires and forgetful of its true nature and destiny. A well-ordered soul, according to Plato, is one where reason rules over the spirited and appetitive parts, much like a skilled charioteer controlling two horses. This hierarchical arrangement isn't arbitrary or oppressive, it's natural and beneficial. Only reason, informed by knowledge of the forms, can discern what is truly good for the whole person. The appetitive part, left to itself, pursues pleasures that ultimately bring pain and suffering. It seeks immediate gratification without understanding long-term consequences. The spirited part, without reason's guidance, might pursue honor and victory through unjust means or respond with anger and aggression inappropriately. When reason governs the soul, guided by knowledge of the forms, especially the form of the good, the individual achieves true happiness and virtue. This isn't the fleeting pleasure that comes from satisfying appetites. It's the deep, lasting fulfillment that comes from living in accordance with truth and reality itself. The person with a well-ordered soul exhibits wisdom, the virtue of the rational part, courage, the virtue of the spirited part, and moderation or temperance, the virtue of the appetitive part accepting reason's rule. When all three parts perform their proper functions in harmony, the person achieves justice, the comprehensive virtue that represents the health and excellence of the entire soul. But when the appetitive part dominates, when the dark horse overpowers the charioteer, the soul descends into vice and misery. The person becomes a slave to physical cravings, always hungry for more pleasure, more wealth, more gratification, yet never satisfied. They might accumulate material possessions, but remain spiritually impoverished. They might satisfy every bodily desire, but find no genuine happiness. This is because happiness, for Plato, isn't about maximizing pleasure. It's about achieving the proper order and harmony of the soul. A soul ruled by appetite is fundamentally disordered, and a disordered soul cannot be happy, no matter how many pleasures it experiences. The spirited part also poses dangers when misdirected. If spirit allies with appetite against reason, if our emotions and desires for honor reinforce our base cravings rather than supporting rationality, we become doubly enslaved. We might pursue wealth with fierce determination, fight aggressively for material advantages, take pride in our appetitive indulgences. This produces the particularly dangerous character type that combines appetitive excess with spirited energy: the ambitious tyrant, the competitive hedonist, the person driven by both lust and pride. This psychological theory became the foundation for Plato's political philosophy in a remarkably elegant way. In the Republic, Plato draws a systematic analogy between the structure of the soul and the structure of the ideal city. Just as the soul has three parts, the city should have three classes. Just as each part of the soul has its proper function and virtue, each class in society has its proper role and excellence. The rational part corresponds to the guardian rulers or philosopher kings, whose wisdom should govern the state. The spirited part corresponds to the auxiliary class or warriors, whose courage defends the city and enforces the ruler's decisions. The appetitive part corresponds to the producer class, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, who satisfy the material needs of society. Justice in the individual means each part of the soul performing its proper function under reason's guidance. Justice in the city means each class performing its proper role without interfering with others. A just city is one where the wise rule, the courageous defend, and the producers create material goods under moderate direction. An unjust city is one where these proper relations are disrupted, where the producers attempt to rule, democracy, where the warrior seize power, timocracy, or where a single appetite-driven individual dominates everyone, tyranny. Each form of bad government corresponds to a disordered soul type. This connection between psychology and politics represents one of Plato's most distinctive contributions. He refused to separate individual ethics from political theory, insisting that the same principles of order, harmony, and rational rule apply at both levels. We cannot achieve a just society with unjust individuals, nor can individuals flourish in an unjust political system. The solution must address both simultaneously, educating individual souls to be well-ordered while structuring society to reflect and reinforce that proper order. The implications for education are profound. If the soul has three parts with different natures and functions, then proper education must address and cultivate each part appropriately. The rational part requires training in mathematics, dialectic, and philosophy, disciplines that strengthen the capacity for abstract thought and logical reasoning. The spirited part requires cultivation through music, poetry, and gymnastics that develop proper emotional responses, courage, and love of honor rightly directed. Even the appetitive part needs proper habituation, teaching it to accept reason's rule and find satisfaction in moderate healthy pleasures rather than excess. Plato recognized that achieving this harmonious order is difficult and rare. Most people remain dominated by their appetites throughout their lives, pursuing wealth and pleasure as their highest goals. Others are ruled by spirit, seeking honor, power, and recognition above wisdom. Only a few, the philosophical natures, achieve true harmony where reason governs effectively. This is why Plato believed so strongly in rigorous education for future rulers. Only through decades of training can the rational part be strengthened enough to control the other parts reliably. The tripartite theory of soul thus provides the psychological foundation for virtually everything else in Plato's philosophy. It explains moral psychology, why we experience internal conflict, and how virtue is achieved. It grounds his political theory, explaining how both individuals and cities should be structured. It connects to his metaphysics, showing how souls naturally oriented toward the forms can be dragged down by bodily appetites. And it offers practical guidance for living, suggesting that the examined life, the life guided by reason in pursuit of wisdom, represents human nature fulfilling its highest potential. The charioteer reaching heaven, the philosopher contemplating the forms, the just soul achieving harmony, these are all expressions of the same fundamental truth. Humans flourish when reason rules, guided by knowledge of what is eternally and truly good. Principle 5. Justice in the soul and state. Justice was Plato's central concern, the animating question that drove him to write his most famous work, the Republic. But understanding Plato's concept of justice requires us to completely rethink what justice means. For most modern readers, justice implies fairness, equality before the law, protection of individual rights, or proper legal procedures. We think of courts, contracts, trials, and constitutional guarantees. Plato's conception of justice is radically different, and in many ways, more profound. For Plato, justice wasn't fundamentally about laws or rights at all. It was about harmony, proper order, and each element in a system performing its natural function without interfering with others. This organic, holistic understanding of justice applied equally to individual souls and to entire societies, creating an elegant parallel between personal ethics and political philosophy. The Republic begins with a series of inadequate definitions of justice proposed by various interlocutors, each representing common views that Plato found unsatisfactory. Cephalus suggests justice means telling the truth and paying one's debts, a conventional legalistic definition. His son Polemarch refines this to mean helping friends and harming enemies. But Socrates demolishes these superficial accounts, demonstrating through dialectical questioning that they lead to contradictions and fail to capture what justice truly is. The real challenge comes from Thrasymachus, a sophist who presents a far more dangerous and sophisticated position. Justice is nothing but the advantage of the stronger. Thrasymachus' argument represents the moral relativism and political cynicism that Plato saw as the greatest threat to civilization. According to Thrasymachus, justice is simply whatever serves the interests of those who hold power. In every society, the strongest party rules and establishes laws that benefit themselves. To act justly means nothing more than obeying these laws, which means acting in the ruler's interest, not your own. Therefore, for everyone except the ruler, justice means acting against one's own interests and serving someone else's advantage. The logical conclusion: injustice is actually superior to justice. The unjust person who successfully pursues their own advantage while appearing just as happier and wiser than the fool who sacrifices self-interest for the sake of so-called justice. This nihilistic position struck at the heart of everything Plato believed. If Thrasymachus is right, then morality is merely a tool of oppression, philosophy is pointless, and the strong have every right to dominate the weak. Might makes right. Truth is whatever those in power say it is. Ethics is just camouflaged self-interest. The entire philosophical project of discovering objective truth and absolute goodness collapses into relativism and power politics. Plato dedicated the remainder of the Republic, roughly 90% of the dialogue, to refuting Thrasymachus and articulating a vision of justice so compelling, so deeply grounded in the nature of reality itself, that it would triumph over cynicism and relativism. Plato's response to moral relativism was radical and uncompromising. Justice is neither the right of the strong nor the advantage of the stronger, but the right of the best and the advantage of the whole community. Justice isn't about one party benefiting at another's expense. It's not a zero-sum game where the ruler wins and subjects lose, or where the clever unjust person gains while the naive just person suffers. Instead, justice is a harmonious condition that benefits everyone involved, ruler and ruled, individual and society, all parts of the whole. This harmony is achieved when each element performs its proper function without usurping the role of others. In the individual soul, justice means each of the three parts performing its proper function under the guidance of reason. The rational part should rule, using wisdom to discern what is genuinely good for the whole person. The spirited part should support reason, providing courage and determination to resist appetitive impulses when necessary. The appetitive part should accept this governance with moderation, seeking its satisfactions within the limits set by reason. When this hierarchical order prevails, when each part does its own work without interfering with the others, the soul achieves justice, and with it, genuine happiness and virtue. The unjust soul, by contrast, is one where this proper order has been disrupted. Perhaps appetite has seized control, making the person a slave to physical pleasures and material desires. Perhaps spirit has allied with appetite against reason, producing an ambitious tyrant driven by both lust and pride. Or perhaps reason has been weakened and corrupted, rationalizing base desires rather than governing them. In every case of injustice, the natural hierarchy is inverted or disrupted, creating internal conflict, disorder, and ultimately misery. The unjust person might appear to prosper temporarily, but their soul is in a state of disharmony, like a body racked with disease. And just as a diseased body cannot be truly healthy no matter how wealthy or powerful the person, a disordered soul cannot be truly happy no matter how successfully it pursues selfish advantage. This understanding of individual justice provides the template for understanding political justice. Plato draws a systematic analogy between the soul and the state, one of the most elegant and influential moves in the history of political philosophy. Just as the soul has three parts, society has three classes. Just as each part of the soul has its proper function and virtue, each class in society has its proper role and excellence. The rational part corresponds to the guardian rulers or philosopher kings, whose wisdom should govern the state. The spirited part corresponds to the auxiliary class or warriors, whose courage defends the city and enforces the ruler's decisions. The appetitive part corresponds to the producer class, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, who satisfy the material needs of society through their labor. Justice in the state, therefore, means each class performing its proper role without interfering with the functions of other classes. The producers should produce, creating wealth and material goods necessary for survival. The warriors should protect, defending the state from external enemies and maintaining internal order. The philosopher rulers should govern, making decisions based on wisdom and knowledge of the good rather than personal ambition or popular opinion. When each class does its own work excellently, when there's no usurpation or role confusion, when the whole structure operates harmoniously under rational direction, the state achieves justice. This is why Plato emphasized specialization so strongly. Each person should fulfill the role for which they are naturally best suited, contributing to the overall good without overstepping their proper function. A farmer who tries to be a general, a merchant who pretends to philosophical wisdom, a soldier who abandons duty to pursue wealth. These represent injustices because they violate the principle of functional harmony. It's not that any particular role is shameful or inferior in itself. Rather, justice requires that everyone occupy their natural place and perform their natural function excellently. A society where each person does what they're best suited to do, under the guidance of those with wisdom, will flourish. Plato's concept of justice thus creates a harmonious unity where all parts can pursue happiness without harming others. This is fundamentally different from a system based on competition, conflict, or compromise. In competitive systems, my gain is your loss. In conflict-based systems, different groups fight for dominance. In compromise-based systems, everyone sacrifices something. But in Plato's harmonious system, justice creates conditions where each element flourishes by doing what it does best, contributing to the whole while fulfilling its own nature. The producers enjoy the fruits of their labor under the protection of warriors and the wise guidance of philosophers. The warriors exercise their courage in service to the community, gaining honor and purpose. The philosophers contemplate truth and govern for the common good, fulfilling their rational nature. Everyone benefits from the harmony. This concept of justice as harmony, rather than equality or individual rights, profoundly distinguished Plato from modern political thought. Modern liberal democracies are built on principles of equality, equal rights, equal protection under law, equal political participation. Justice means treating like cases alike and respecting individual autonomy. Plato would have found this concept deeply misguided. People aren't equal in Plato's view. They differ radically in their natural capacities, their dominant soul parts, and their fitness for different roles. Treating everyone equally means violating nature itself, forcing people into roles they're unsuited for, and destroying the harmony that justice requires. Similarly, modern conceptions of justice emphasize individual rights, freedom of speech, property rights, due process, privacy. The just society protects these rights and limits governmental power. For Plato, this individualism is precisely the problem. Justice isn't about protecting individual autonomy. It's about integrating individuals into a harmonious whole where each performs their proper function. The state isn't a necessary evil that threatens individual freedom. It's the framework within which individuals can fulfill their nature and achieve genuine happiness. Rights and freedoms, from Plato's perspective, are meaningless unless directed toward the proper ends: wisdom, virtue, and harmonious order. Plato expressed this anti-individualistic vision through the principle of non-interference. Justice means each element doing its own work without meddling in others' affairs. The state has been considered by Plato as a perfect whole in which each individual element functions not for itself but for the health of the whole. Every element fulfills its appropriate function, like organs in a healthy body or planets in their orderly movement through the heavens. A society organized according to this principle is fit for survival. Where people are out of their natural places, coordination is destroyed, society disintegrates and dissolves. Justice is the citizen's sense of duties to the whole that give meaning and purpose to individual existence. Justice, therefore, is simultaneously a personal virtue and a social bond. At the individual level, it's the virtue that creates internal harmony, making the soul healthy and whole. Socially, it's the principle that binds people together in cooperative relationships, ensuring that society functions as an integrated organism rather than a collection of competing individuals. Plato says that justice is not mere strength, but harmonious strength. Justice is not the right of the stronger, but the effective harmony of the whole. All moral conceptions revolve around the good of the whole, individual as well as social. To the soul, justice is what health is to the body, the proper condition that allows all functions to operate correctly. A body is healthy when all its parts work together harmoniously. The heart pumps blood, the lungs breathe air, the stomach digests food, each organ performing its function without interfering with others. Disease occurs when this harmony breaks down, when one organ fails, when hostile elements invade, when the natural order is disrupted. Similarly, a soul is just when all its parts work together under reason's guidance, and unjust when this harmony is disrupted by appetitive dominance or spirited rebellion. This organic metaphor shapes Plato's entire political vision. The ideal state isn't a machine constructed according to arbitrary specifications, nor is it a contract among autonomous individuals protecting their rights. It's a living organism with natural structure and functions. Just as you can't decide that your stomach should think or your brain should digest, you can't arbitrarily reassign social functions without destroying the organism. The structure must reflect natural capacities and roles. When it does, when wisdom governs, courage protects, and productivity sustains, the political organism thrives. When this order is violated, when the appetitive class seizes power, or when everyone claims equal right to rule, the organism sickens and dies. Plato's justice thus represents a comprehensive vision of individual and social excellence grounded in metaphysical reality. It's not a human construction or social convention that could be otherwise. It reflects the eternal structure of reality itself, the same principles of order, hierarchy, and harmony that characterize the forms and the cosmos. A just soul mirrors the rational order of the universe, A just state embodies philosophical truth in political form. This is why justice is so crucial. It's not merely a useful social arrangement, but the earthly expression of eternal cosmic principles. To pursue justice is to align oneself with reality. To embrace injustice is to rebel against the nature of existence itself. Principle 6. The ideal state. Plato's vision of the ideal state mirrors his theory of the soul with remarkable precision and elegance. This isn't coincidental. For Plato, the same principles of order, hierarchy, and functional harmony that govern individual well-being also govern collective flourishing. Just as the soul has three parts that must work together in proper relation, society should have three classes that collaborate under rational guidance. Just as psychic justice means each part of the soul performing its natural function, political justice means each social class fulfilling its designated role without usurping the functions of others. This systematic analogy between psychology and politics created one of the most influential and controversial visions of social organization in Western philosophy. The three classes of Plato's ideal state, which he calls Kallipolis, meaning beautiful city, correspond directly to the tripartite soul. At the top stand the rulers, also called guardians or philosopher kings. These are individuals in whom the rational part of the soul dominates completely. They've undergone decades of rigorous education in mathematics, dialectic, and philosophy, culminating in direct intellectual apprehension of the forms, especially the form of the good. Their wisdom, the virtue of the rational part, qualifies them uniquely to govern. They make decisions not based on personal ambition, popular opinion, or immediate advantage, but based on eternal principles of truth and goodness. They rule not because they desire power, but because they alone possess the knowledge necessary to rule justly. The middle class consists of the auxiliaries, also called guardians or warriors. These are individuals in whom the spirited part of the soul predominates, people characterized by courage, honor, loyalty, and martial virtue. They've received extensive physical and military training to develop their bodies and their capacity for disciplined action. Their role is to defend the state from external enemies and maintain internal order by enforcing the ruler's decisions. They are the executive arm of government, translating the philosopher king's wisdom into concrete action and protection. The auxiliaries embody courage, the virtue of the spirited part, standing firm in defense of the city's values and refusing to be corrupted by fear or greed. The lowest class comprises the producers, farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and all other laborers who create the material foundation of society. These are individuals in whom the appetitive part of the soul dominates, people primarily concerned with physical needs, material goods, and economic activity. While this might sound derogatory, Plato doesn't consider them inferior in worth or dignity, merely different in natural capacity and function. Their role is absolutely essential. They produce food, clothing, shelter, tools, and all the material goods necessary for survival and prosperity. Without the producers, the state would collapse. Their virtue is moderation or temperance, accepting limits on their appetitive desires, working diligently at their crafts, and recognizing the authority of those whose wisdom qualifies them to lead. Political justice exists when each class performs its designated function without usurping the role of others. The producers should produce, focusing on their trades and economic activities, not attempting to make political decisions or engage in military action. The auxiliaries should protect and enforce, defending the city and maintaining order, not trying to govern through wisdom they don't possess or abandoning their posts to pursue wealth. The philosopher kings should govern, applying their knowledge of the forms to political decisions, not descending into material pursuits or allowing personal desires to corrupt their judgment. When this functional specialization prevails, when each class does its own work excellently and cooperatively, the state achieves justice and flourishes. This hierarchical system was Plato's deliberate answer to the chaos of Athenian democracy, which he believed had devolved into rule by ignorance and passion rather than wisdom and reason. Plato lived through Athens's traumatic defeat in the Peloponnesian War, witnessed the violent oscillations between democratic excess and oligarchic reaction, and watched his beloved teacher Socrates condemned to death by democratic vote. These experiences convinced him that democracy was fundamentally flawed, not just poorly implemented in Athens, but inherently self-destructive as a form of government. Plato's critique of democracy in the Republic is devastating and uncomfortably prescient. He argued that democracy emerges from oligarchy when the poor revolt against the wealthy and establish a regime of freedom and equality. Initially, this seems wonderful. Everyone is free to do as they please, pursue their own interests, and participate equally in government. But this very freedom contains the seeds of democracy's destruction. In a democracy, Plato observed, there are no restrictions on who can rule or how political decisions are made. No one is compelled to participate if they don't want to, yet anyone can seek power regardless of their qualifications. Even during war, democratic citizens can peacefully abstain from defending the city if they choose. The relationships between rulers and subjects, parents and children, teachers and students become undefined and interchangeable. The fundamental problem, according to Plato, is that democracy treats ruling as though it requires no special expertise, as though any citizen's opinion is equally valid on matters of governance. But ruling is a skilled trade, like medicine, navigation, or carpentry. Would we let passengers vote on how to pilot an airplane? Would we allow people with no medical training to perform surgery just because they're enthusiastic? Would we trust someone who has never studied architecture to design a bridge? Of course not. We recognize that these activities require specialized knowledge and training. Yet in democracy, the complex art of governing an entire society is thrown open to everyone, regardless of whether they possess the wisdom, education, or virtue necessary for leadership. Plato illustrated this with his famous ship of state analogy. Imagine a ship where the passengers hold an election to choose the captain. The actual skilled navigators might argue convincingly for their selection, but what if they can't present their case persuasively? What if other passengers claim that sailing can be done by anyone, or that navigators are too preoccupied with charts and stars to care about ordinary travelers? What if someone wins the election through bribery, manipulation, emotional appeals, or lies? The ship would almost certainly crash, because the ability to win a popularity contest doesn't correspond to the ability to navigate safely. Similarly, the skills needed to win democratic elections, charisma, rhetoric, pandering to popular prejudices, bear little relation to the wisdom needed to govern well. Even worse, democracy is perpetually vulnerable to demagogues, clever speakers who rise to power by flattering the masses, promising everything, stirring up emotions, and exploiting people's ignorance. The demagogue tells people what they want to hear rather than what they need to know. He appeals to base desires rather than rational understanding. Once in power, he commits terrible acts of immorality and depravity, using his position to satisfy personal appetites and ambitions. This inevitably leads to the complete collapse of democratic order and its transformation into tyranny, the worst form of government, where a single appetite-driven individual rules absolutely, enslaving the entire society to his whims. In contrast, Plato's ideal state is built on the principle of specialization according to natural ability. From early childhood, citizens are observed and tested to determine which of the three classes they're naturally suited for. Those with predominantly appetitive souls, who find satisfaction in material production and have little capacity for sustained abstract thought or martial courage, enter the producer class. Those with spirited souls, who exhibit courage, loyalty, love of honor, and physical prowess, become auxiliaries. Only a tiny elite, those rare individuals who combine intellectual brilliance with moral virtue and genuine love of wisdom, progress through the complete educational system to become philosopher rulers. The education of philosopher kings is extraordinarily demanding, spanning roughly 50 years from childhood to readiness for rule. It begins in early childhood with music and poetry carefully selected to nurture proper moral character, avoiding harmful myths and emphasizing ethical tales. Physical training through gymnastics balances mental and bodily development, fostering discipline and teamwork. From ages 18 to 35, the future rulers study mathematics intensively, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and harmonics, cultivating abstract reasoning and training the mind to think beyond sensory appearances. From 35 to 50, they study dialectic, learning philosophical method, questioning assumptions, analyzing arguments systematically, and gradually ascending toward comprehension of the forms themselves. Critically, this education isn't merely intellectual, it's transformative of the entire soul. It aims to turn the soul away from the shadows of material existence toward the light of eternal truth. Through mathematics, students learn to think abstractly. Through dialectic, they develop critical reasoning. Through philosophy, they eventually grasp the form of the good itself. Only someone who has completed this journey, who has ascended from the cave of ignorance to the sunlit realm of forms, possesses the wisdom necessary to govern justly. And only such a person can be trusted with absolute power, because they've learned to value truth and goodness above personal pleasure, wealth, or fame. To prevent corruption, Plato proposed radical measures for the guardian class, both rulers and auxiliaries. They would live communally without private property, receiving their sustenance from the producer class but owning nothing themselves. They would have no traditional families. Instead, mating would be arranged by the rulers for eugenic purposes, and children would be raised communally without knowing their biological parents. This eliminates the conflicts of interest that corrupt most governments. Rulers cannot favor their own families, accumulate personal wealth, or pass privileges to their offspring. They rule purely for the common good because they have no private interests to advance. Plato even advocated for complete gender equality among the guardian class, a remarkably progressive position for ancient Greece. He argued that sex should not determine who can rule or fight. Women who possess the necessary intellectual and spirited qualities should be educated identically to men and hold the same roles. Only natural capacity matters, not biological sex. This follows from Plato's fundamental principle. Justice means each person performing the function for which they're naturally best suited, regardless of conventional social categories. To maintain this social structure, Plato controversially suggested a noble lie, a founding myth that all citizens would be taught. According to this myth, everyone is born from the earth itself, making all citizens siblings. But the gods mixed gold into the souls of those fit to rule, silver into the souls of auxiliaries, and bronze or iron into the souls of producers. This myth of metals serves to justify the class system, encouraging each person to accept their designated role as natural and divinely ordained. While Plato acknowledged that this is a falsehood, he argued it's necessary for social stability and unity, a noble lie that promotes the common good even as it deceives. The ideal state, therefore, represents the political embodiment of philosophical truth. It's a society organized according to eternal principles of justice, order, and rational hierarchy rather than democratic equality or libertarian freedom. Each class performs its natural function under the guidance of those who comprehend the forms. Wisdom governs, courage defends, moderation produces. The result is a harmonious whole where everyone contributes according to their abilities and receives according to their needs, not because of laws and contracts, but because the entire structure reflects the natural order of reality itself. This is the state that Plato believed could overcome the cycle of political decay, resist the corruption that destroyed Athens, and finally embody justice in political form. Principle 7. The Four Cardinal Virtues. Plato's ethics centered on four cardinal virtues that became foundational to Western moral philosophy for over 2 millennia: wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. These weren't arbitrary moral qualities plucked from thin air. They emerged systematically from Plato's tripartite theory of the soul and his vision of the ideal state. Each virtue corresponds to a specific part of the soul and a particular social class, creating an elegant ethical framework that applies equally to individual character and collective political life. Understanding these four virtues is essential to grasping how Plato believed individuals and societies could achieve excellence, harmony, and true happiness. Wisdom, Sophia or phronesis in Greek, is the knowledge of the whole, including self-knowledge and political prudence. It's not merely information or expertise in a narrow domain, it's comprehensive understanding of reality itself, grounded in direct intellectual apprehension of the forms. Wisdom means knowing what is truly good, truly beautiful, truly just, not as matters of opinion but as eternal facts about reality. The wise person understands not only abstract philosophical principles, but also how to apply them to concrete situations. They possess practical judgment about how to live well and how to govern justly. Wisdom is the distinctive virtue of the rational part of the soul, that aspect of human nature that loves learning, seeks truth, and can contemplate eternal realities. A person in whom the rational part dominates, one who has pursued philosophy rigorously and ascended to knowledge of the forms, embodies wisdom. In the ideal state, wisdom is the quality that characterizes the ruling class, the philosopher kings who govern not through force or popular appeal, but through knowledge of what is genuinely beneficial for the entire community. Their wisdom isn't self-interested cleverness or technical skill, it's understanding of ultimate reality that qualifies them uniquely to make decisions affecting everyone. Without wisdom, individuals and societies stumble in darkness, mistaking shadows for reality, pursuing apparent goods that turn out to be harmful, and making decisions based on ignorance, prejudice, or short-term expediency. Wisdom is what enables us to distinguish genuine happiness from mere pleasure, true justice from convenient self-interest, real knowledge from persuasive rhetoric. It's the virtue that guides all the others, providing the insight necessary to act rightly in every situation. Courage, Andreia in Greek, is civic courage, the ability to preserve right beliefs and defend values like friendship and freedom even in the face of danger, pain, or death. But Plato's conception of courage goes deeper than mere battlefield bravery or physical fearlessness. Courage means maintaining unwavering beliefs about what is truly dangerous and what isn't, about what deserves to be feared and what doesn't, even when emotions, pleasures, pains, or desires threaten to overwhelm rational judgment. It's the steadfastness of spirit that supports reason against the pressures of appetite and circumstance. Courage is the distinctive virtue of the spirited part of the soul, that aspect of human nature concerned with honor, pride, righteous anger, and emotional responses to perceived threats or insults. A courageous person doesn't simply feel brave, they've habituated their emotions to align with rational understanding about what truly matters. They defend what is right even when it's difficult, unpopular, or dangerous. They resist both the temptations of pleasure and the intimidations of pain when these would compromise their principles. In the ideal state, courage characterizes the auxiliary class, the warriors who defend the city from external enemies and maintain internal order. Their courage isn't reckless aggression or brutish violence, but disciplined strength directed by wisdom. They've been educated to love honor rightly, to fight for just causes, to protect the community without seeking personal glory or material gain. Their spirited nature, properly cultivated through music and gymnastics, makes them loyal guardians of the state's values and fierce defenders of its territory. Without courage, even wise insights remain ineffective. One might know what is right but lack the strength to do it when faced with opposition, hardship, or personal cost. Courage provides the emotional fortitude, the spirited determination, the refusal to compromise that allows wisdom to translate into action. It's what prevents philosophy from being mere intellectual exercise detached from practical life. Moderation or temperance, sophrosyne in Greek, is the sense of limits that brings peace and happiness. It's the capacity to control desires and pleasures, maintaining harmonious equilibrium rather than being swept away by appetites. Moderation means accepting the rule of reason over appetite, agreeing that wisdom should govern desire, and finding satisfaction in measured pleasures appropriate to one's role and nature rather than constantly craving excess. What makes moderation distinctive among the cardinal virtues is that it must be shared by all classes and all parts of the soul. While wisdom belongs primarily to rulers and the rational part, while courage belongs primarily to auxiliaries and the spirited part, moderation characterizes the entire soul and the entire state. It's the virtue of willing acceptance, the producers accepting the wisdom of philosophers, the auxiliaries accepting the authority of rulers, the appetites accepting the governance of reason. Moderation creates agreement throughout the system about who should rule and who should follow. At the individual level, moderation prevents the appetitive part from dominating the soul. The moderate person doesn't eliminate physical desires, that would be impossible and unhealthy, but keeps them within appropriate bounds. They eat when hungry but don't gluttonize. They enjoy pleasures but don't become enslaved to them. They pursue material goods for reasonable needs, but don't let acquisitiveness become an obsession. The appetitive part accepts reason's judgment about how much, when, and what kinds of satisfactions are appropriate. In the state, moderation manifests as social harmony and consensus. The producer class doesn't resent being governed by philosophers or protected by warriors. They recognize their own limitations and accept the natural hierarchy. The warriors don't abandon their posts to pursue wealth. They find fulfillment in honor and service rather than material accumulation. Everyone, from highest to lowest, agrees about the proper order and accepts their role within it. This isn't enforced compliance through coercion, but genuine inner agreement about what is right and just. Without moderation, societies and souls descend into chaos and conflict. Appetites rage unchecked, demanding more and more gratification yet never finding satisfaction. Social classes compete and clash, each seeking dominance over others. The very possibility of harmony, of different elements cooperating toward a common good, disappears when moderation is absent. Justice, dikaiosine in Greek, is the overarching virtue that ensures each part does its proper work. Justice is different from the other three virtues because it doesn't belong to any one part of the soul or class of society. It describes the right relationship among all the parts. Justice is the harmonious alignment of one's inner self and the comprehensive integrity of the soul. It's what results when wisdom governs, courage supports, and moderation pervades the whole system. When each part of the soul performs its proper function without interfering with others, when reason rules with wisdom, when spirit supports with courage, when appetite accepts limits with moderation, the soul achieves justice. This psychic justice is simultaneously the definition of virtue and the guarantee of happiness. The just soul is like a perfectly tuned instrument where all strings vibrate in harmony, or a healthy body where all organs function properly. Nothing is out of place, nothing usurps another's role, nothing disrupts the overall unity. Similarly, when each class in society performs its designated function, when philosophers rule with wisdom, when warriors defend with courage, when producers create with moderation, the state achieves justice. Political justice is structural. It consists in the right and fixed relationships between the three classes. Each must do the appropriate job and only that job, and each must be in the right position of power and influence relative to the others. Justice thus rivals the other three virtues in importance because it depends on all of them and encompasses all of them. You cannot have a just soul without wisdom, courage, and moderation working together properly. Justice is the synthesis, the harmonious whole that emerges when each virtue operates in its proper domain. It's both the goal of ethics and the method for achieving that goal, for a just person naturally acts wisely, courageously, and moderately in appropriate ways. These four virtues describe both the ideal state and the well-ordered soul because Plato believed the same principles govern excellence at every level of organization. Whether we're talking about an individual trying to live well or a society trying to organize itself justly, the requirements are identical. Reason must govern with wisdom, spirit must support with courage, appetite must accept limits with moderation, and all parts must perform their proper functions in harmonious relationship. The cardinal virtues aren't arbitrary cultural values or conventional moral rules. They're expressions of the natural order that reflects eternal forms. Plato believed that only through cultivating these virtues could individuals and societies achieve true happiness, eudaimonia. Happiness isn't pleasure, wealth, power, or fame, all of which can coexist with profoundly disordered souls. Rather, happiness is the flourishing that comes from being what you're supposed to be, functioning as you're designed to function, achieving the natural excellence appropriate to your nature. A just soul, one characterized by wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice, is a healthy, well-ordered, harmonious soul. And such a soul necessarily experiences happiness because it's functioning optimally, actualizing its potential, living in accordance with truth. Conversely, vice leads to internal conflict and social disorder. The unjust soul is like a diseased body. Its parts work against each other rather than cooperating. When appetite dominates, the person becomes enslaved to insatiable desires, pursuing pleasures that bring no lasting satisfaction. When reason is weak or corrupted, the person mistakes shadows for reality, pursuing apparent goods that turn out to be harmful. When spirit allies with appetite against reason, the person becomes dangerously ambitious, combining energy and determination with fundamentally misguided goals. In every case of vice, psychic harmony is destroyed, and with it, the possibility of genuine happiness. Similarly, an unjust state suffers constant internal conflict. Classes compete for dominance rather than cooperating. Rulers govern for personal advantage rather than common good. Warriors abandon duty to pursue wealth. Producers attempt to rule without the wisdom to do so competently. The result is factional strife, inefficient governance, and eventual collapse into tyranny or chaos. Just as the unjust individual cannot be truly happy no matter how wealthy or powerful, the unjust state cannot flourish no matter how large its territory or vast its resources. The four cardinal virtues thus provide the ethical core of Plato's philosophy. They show concretely what it means to live well, both individually and collectively. They connect ethics to metaphysics, for the virtues reflect the eternal structure of reality itself. They connect psychology to politics, for the same virtues that order the soul also order society. And they connect virtue to happiness, for only the virtuous soul, characterized by wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice in proper harmony, can achieve the true flourishing that constitutes human excellence. This comprehensive ethical vision shaped not only Greek philosophy but also Roman Stoicism, medieval Christianity, and modern virtue ethics, making Plato's four cardinal virtues among the most enduringly influential ideas in Western moral thought. Principle 8. The immortality of the soul. Plato firmly believed in the immortality of the soul, a doctrine he explored extensively in several dialogues, most famously the Phaedo and the Republic. This wasn't a peripheral belief or an afterthought, it was central to his entire philosophical system. For Plato, the soul's immortality provided the metaphysical foundation for ethics, the ultimate justification for living virtuously, and the deepest truth about human nature. The soul, being immaterial and aligned with the eternal realm of forms, does not perish with the body. Instead, it continues beyond physical death, with its fate determined by how virtuously one lived. This doctrine connected Plato's metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics into a unified vision where the nature of reality itself dictates how we should live. The Phaedo, set during the final hours before Socrates drinks the poison hemlock, presents multiple sophisticated arguments for the soul's immortality. The dialogue depicts Socrates calmly discussing philosophy with his grieving disciples, explaining why philosophers should not fear death. His central claim is radical. Death is actually beneficial for philosophers because it releases the soul from the prison of the body, allowing it to reunite with the eternal forms it naturally belongs to. But this claim requires proof. Socrates must demonstrate that the soul doesn't simply dissipate when the body dies. The first argument, called the argument from opposites or cyclical argument, claims that all things come to be from their opposites. Sleep comes from waking and waking from sleep. The larger comes from the smaller and the smaller from the larger. Similarly, life must come from death and death from life. If this weren't true, if the dead didn't return to life, then eventually everything would end up dead and existence would cease. Therefore, there must be a cycle where souls return from death to life. This implies the soul continues to exist after bodily death in order to be reborn later. While logically structured, this argument depends on the principle of opposites and the assumption of cyclical generation that many find questionable. The second argument invokes the theory of recollection, anamnesis, which we discussed earlier. If learning is actually recollection of knowledge the soul possessed before birth, then the soul must have existed before entering the body. We recognize perfect equality, beauty, and justice even though we've never encountered them in sensory experience. We must therefore be remembering them from a previous existence when our souls directly encountered the forms. If the soul existed before birth, it's not a product of bodily processes, which suggests it can also exist after bodily death. This argument connects the immortality of the soul to Plato's entire epistemological system. The third argument, the argument from affinity, draws a fundamental distinction between two kinds of things, the composite and the simple. Composite things, physical objects made of parts, are subject to dissolution and destruction. They change, decay, and eventually fall apart. Simple things, entities without parts, cannot be broken down or destroyed because there's nothing to separate. The forms are simple, eternal, unchanging, and invisible. Physical bodies are composite, temporary, changing, and visible. Now, the soul resembles the forms far more than it resembles physical bodies. The soul is invisible, can contemplate eternal truths, and is concerned with unchanging realities. Therefore, the soul is more like the simple, indestructible forms than like composite, destructible bodies, making it likely immortal. The fourth and most sophisticated argument, the final argument from the form of life, is the most complex and philosophically rigorous. Plato argues that the soul brings life to the body. Life is what the soul essentially is and does. Just as fire necessarily brings heat and cannot become cold while remaining fire, the soul necessarily brings life and cannot become dead while remaining soul. Death is the opposite of life, and the soul, by its very nature, cannot admit its opposite. When death approaches the body, the soul must either retreat, continuing to exist elsewhere, or be destroyed. But since the soul is essentially life-giving and cannot admit death, it cannot be destroyed, it must retreat, continuing to exist eternally. This argument makes the soul's immortality follow from its essential nature. Plato wanted his readers to understand that there is a dualism between body and soul that culminates in their ultimate separation at death. The body belongs to the visible material realm of constant change and decay. It's weighed down by physical needs, appetites, and sensations that distract the soul from truth. The soul, by contrast, is akin to the invisible, immaterial realm of forms. It's naturally oriented toward eternal truths and would function best without bodily interference. Philosophy, in Plato's view, is essentially the practice of dying, training the soul to separate itself from bodily concerns while still alive, in preparation for death when this separation becomes complete. The true philosopher dishonors the body and runs away from the body, eager to release the soul from its material prison. This belief had profound ethical implications that transformed Plato's entire moral philosophy. If the soul is immortal and justice ultimately prevails in the cosmic order, then it is always in one's best interest to be just, regardless of earthly consequences. Even if an unjust person appears to prosper during their physical lifetime, accumulating wealth, power, and pleasure through immoral means, their soul is being damaged. This damage persists beyond death and determines their fate in the afterlife. Conversely, even if a just person suffers terribly during earthly life, poverty, persecution, or execution like Socrates, their soul is being purified and elevated, ensuring ultimate reward. This ethical logic reverses the cynical calculation presented by Thrasymachus and other moral relativists. They argued that justice is disadvantageous because it means sacrificing self-interest to serve others or follow arbitrary rules. But if the soul is immortal, then the self whose interest we should serve isn't the temporary physical body but the eternal soul. What benefits the soul, virtue, wisdom, justice, is genuinely in our self-interest, while what benefits the body at the soul's expense, vice, ignorance, injustice, harms us fundamentally and permanently. The apparent conflict between morality and self-interest disappears once we recognize our true nature as immortal souls temporarily incarnated in physical bodies. The famous myth of Air at the end of the Republic dramatically illustrates these ethical implications through a visionary narrative. Air was a soldier who died in battle, but returned to life to tell what he witnessed in the afterlife. He described souls being judged after death, with the just ascending to beautiful realms and receiving rewards, while the unjust ascend to places of punishment where they suffer for their earthly crimes. Notably, unjust souls suffer tenfold for each injustice committed. Tyrants and murderers endure terrible torments proportional to their wickedness. After 1,000 years, souls return and are given the opportunity to choose their next lives. The choices souls make in the myth of Air reveal character formed by previous lives. Some souls who had been rewarded for justice but hadn't truly philosophically examined why justice is good hastily choose lives of power and pleasure, not recognizing the misery these will bring. Former tyrants, having learned from punishment, often choose humble lives. The wise soul of Odysseus, having suffered greatly in his heroic life, chooses last and selects the quiet life of an ordinary citizen, content with obscurity. The myth emphasizes that we bear responsibility for our choices. The blame belongs to the chooser. God is blameless. Our fate is determined not by external forces, but by the character of our souls, shaped by how we've lived. This myth introduces concepts of reincarnation and metempsychosis, the transmigration of souls through multiple lifetimes. Plato believed that the soul exists eternally, repeatedly incarnating in different bodies. A soul might live as a human, then as an animal, if particularly vicious, then return as a human of different character depending on lessons learned. This cycle continues until the philosophical soul, having achieved sufficient wisdom and purification, escapes the wheel of rebirth entirely to dwell permanently with the forms. This transcendent dimension, the belief that we are immortal souls corrupted by vice and purified by virtue through multiple lifetimes, made ethics inseparable from metaphysics in Plato's system. The doctrine of the soul's immortality profoundly influenced later religious and philosophical traditions. Early Christianity, while rejecting reincarnation, adopted Platonic dualism between immortal soul and mortal body, the idea of judgment after death, and the vision of souls experiencing reward or punishment based on earthly deeds. Thinkers like Augustine and Clement of Alexandria explicitly drew on Plato's arguments when articulating Christian eschatology. The concept of the soul as an immaterial substance distinct from the body, capable of surviving bodily death and existing consciously in an afterlife, became foundational to Western religious thought largely through Platonic influence. For Plato himself, the immortality of the soul completed his philosophical system. It explained how knowledge of eternal forms is possible. The soul encountered them before birth. It grounded his ethical system. Virtue benefits the immortal soul while vice damages it eternally. It justified his political philosophy. The philosopher rulers who govern the ideal state do so knowing their true reward comes not from earthly power but from the state of their immortal souls. It made sense of death, not as annihilation but as liberation of the soul to return to its natural home among the forms. And it provided ultimate meaning to human existence. We are not merely temporary biological organisms but immortal spiritual beings on a journey toward wisdom, virtue, and eventual reunion with eternal truth. This vision demands that we live philosophically, cultivating the soul rather than indulging the body, pursuing wisdom rather than pleasure, practicing virtue rather than seeking advantage. The examined life becomes not just the best way to live, but the only rational way, given that we are immortal souls whose fundamental well-being depends on the choices we make across multiple lifetimes. Death loses its terror for the philosopher who has lived justly, because they know their soul will continue, purified and elevated, moving closer to the eternal truth they've devoted their lives to understanding. This is why Socrates faced his own execution with serenity. He understood that he was an immortal soul temporarily inhabiting a body, and that death would release him from physical limitations to dwell more fully in the realm of wisdom he'd always loved. The critique and counter-arguments. Of course, Plato's philosophy isn't without its critics, and there are significant fundamental problems with his system that have troubled philosophers for over 2,000 years. Even during his own lifetime, Plato faced devastating objections, and modern scholars have added layers of criticism that challenge not just specific doctrines but the entire edifice of his thought. Let's examine the most serious problems, beginning with the metaphysical foundation and moving to the political implications that many find deeply troubling. The theory of forms, while elegant and influential, raises difficult questions that Plato himself acknowledged but never fully resolved. The most famous objection is the third man argument, which Plato actually presented in his own dialogue, the Parmenides. Here's the problem. Suppose we have multiple large things, 3 tall buildings for instance. According to Plato, they're all large because they participate in the form of largeness. But the form of largeness itself must also be large. It exemplifies the very quality it represents. Now we have a new collection, the 3 tall buildings plus the form of largeness, all of which are large. By Plato's own logic, there must be another form, call it largeness 2, that explains why this new collection shares the property of being large. But largeness 2 must also be large, so we need largeness 3, and so on to infinity. This infinite regress threatens to make the entire theory incoherent. If forms are separate from physical objects,